When you've lost everything that matters, the cold ground becomes both your punishment and your teacher. Vance Reyes knew that feeling well as he lay under the night sky, wondering how a man who once built dreams for others ended up with nothing but regret. He was 46, broke, and sleeping in the woods on a small piece of land nobody else wanted. Winter was coming, so he started digging a shelter beneath an old tree stump, just something to keep him alive. 3 feet down, his shovel struck metal. What he found buried there had been hidden for over 50 years, a secret that would give him one more chance at the life he'd lost. But would it be enough to bring his family back? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the pine branches above Vance's makeshift camp, casting long shadows across the tarp he'd stretched between 2 trees. He'd been living this way for 8 months now, and he'd learned to measure time differently out here. Not by clocks or calendars, but by the angle of light through the leaves, the temperature of the air against his skin, the sounds of birds marking the passage of each day. He sat up slowly, his back protesting the night spent on hard ground, and reached for the thermos of coffee he'd made over his small campfire the evening before. It was lukewarm now, but he drank it anyway, savoring the bitter taste. Small comforts mattered more when you had so few of them. Vance was 46 years old, though some days he felt 70. His face had weathered over the past few years, lines deepening around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair, now streaked with grey, hung longer than he'd ever worn it before. He kept it pulled back with a rubber band he'd found on the ground near the hardware store in town. His clothes were clean but worn. He did his laundry at the laundromat every 2 weeks, using quarters he earned from odd jobs, and his hands bore the calluses and scars of manual labor. This wasn't how his life was supposed to turn out. 20 years ago, Vance had been a rising star in a small architectural firm in Portland. He'd graduated near the top of his class, full of ideas about sustainable design and community-focused development. He'd met Brenda at a gallery opening. She was a teacher, warm and practical, with a laugh that made him feel like he could do anything. They married within a year, bought a modest house in a good neighborhood, and started building the life they'd dreamed about. Shelby came first, a serious baby who grew into a thoughtful child. She had Brenda's dark eyes and Vance's stubborn determination. 3 years later, Austin arrived, all energy and chaos, keeping them constantly moving. Vance remembered those years with a clarity that sometimes hurt, the way Shelby would sit beside him at his drafting table, coloring while he worked, the sound of Austin's laughter echoing through the house, Brenda's hand in his as they watched their children sleep. He'd wanted to give them everything. That desire, that need to provide, had been the beginning of his unraveling. When a senior partner at his firm offered him the chance to invest in a development project, luxury condos near the waterfront, Vance had seen it as his opportunity to secure his family's future. He'd taken out a second mortgage on their house, borrowed against his retirement, convinced Brenda it was a sure thing. The partner had 20 years of experience. The market projections looked solid. It couldn't fail, except it did. The partner had been cooking the books, inflating projections, hiding debts. When the project collapsed, it took Vance's savings with it. Worse, the partner disappeared, leaving Vance and 2 other junior associates holding the legal and financial liability. The lawsuits came fast. The creditors were relentless. Within 18 months, they'd lost the house, drained their accounts, and Vance's reputation in the industry was destroyed. Brenda had stood by him through the worst of it, but the strain fractured something between them. He became withdrawn, bitter, unable to accept what had happened. She urged him to find other work, to move forward, but he kept chasing ways to recoup their losses, taking on riskier and riskier ventures. Each failure drove them further apart. The divorce came when Shelby was 15 and Austin was 12. Brenda got primary custody, which was fair. Vance was barely holding himself together. He moved into a cheap apartment, took whatever construction work he could find, and paid what child support he could manage. But the distance between him and his children grew with each missed soccer game, each forgotten birthday, each promise he couldn't keep. Shelby had tried to maintain their relationship at first. She'd call, visit, invite him to school events. But Vance was drowning in his own failures, and he kept pushing her away, too ashamed to let her see how far he'd fallen. The last real conversation they'd had was 2 years ago, when she'd confronted him about his drinking and his refusal to accept help. She'd cried, told him she loved him but couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore. He hadn't spoken to her since. Austin had shut him out even earlier, angry at the divorce, at the upheaval, at having a father who'd become unreliable. The last text Vance had received from his son was 3 years ago. "Stop trying. I'm done." Those words still echoed in his mind during the long, quiet nights. The final collapse had come last winter. Vance lost his apartment when he couldn't make rent, lost his truck when he couldn't make payments, lost the few belongings he'd managed to keep. A friend from his construction days took pity on him and mentioned this property, 5 acres of dense woods about 40 miles outside Portland, inherited by someone who'd never bothered to develop it and eventually abandoned the tax payments. Vance had scraped together enough money to buy it at the county auction for almost nothing. It wasn't much, no utilities, no structures, just trees and undergrowth, and a narrow dirt road leading in from the highway. But it was his, and it was shelter of a kind. He'd pitched his top, dug a fire pit, and learned to live with less than he'd ever imagined possible. The town nearest to his property was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Vance kept to himself mostly, but there were a few people who'd shown him unexpected kindness. Eugene ran the hardware store on Main Street, a solid man in his 60s with hands like tree roots and a face that rarely smiled but held no judgment. He'd given Vance day work a few times, loading trucks and organizing inventory, and never asked questions about why Vance paid in cash or where he was living. Eugene had a way of seeing people clearly without making them feel exposed. Father Dominic at St. Anthony's had introduced himself one day when Vance came to fill his water jugs at the church's outdoor spigot. The priest was younger than Vance expected, maybe 50, with graying temples and an easy manner. He'd invited Vance to Sunday services, not pushing when Vance declined, just letting him know the offer stood. Sometimes Vance would stop by on weekday afternoons when the church was empty, sitting in the back pew and finding something close to peace in the quiet. These small connections sustained him, even as they reminded him of everything he'd lost. Now sitting in his camp as autumn deepened toward winter, Vance knew he couldn't keep living this way. The nights were getting colder. His tarp and sleeping bag wouldn't be enough once the real cold arrived. He needed better shelter, something insulated, something that would keep him alive through the months ahead. He'd spent the past week surveying his property, looking for the best spot to dig. There was a massive old stump near the center of his land, the remains of what must have been an enormous Douglas fir. The roots were thick and gnarled, creating natural support structures. If he could dig beneath it, use the stump itself as part of the roof structure, he might be able to create something livable. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. And having something to work toward, even something small, felt better than the empty drift of the past months. Vance finished his coffee, stood, and walked to the stump. He'd already started clearing away the loose soil and debris around its base. Today he'd begin digging in earnest. He had no idea that 3 feet down, his shovel would strike something that would change everything. Vance worked through the morning with steady determination, his shovel biting into the packed earth beneath the massive stump. The rhythm of the work was meditative. Lift, thrust, scoop, toss. His muscles remembered this kind of labor from his construction days, even if they protested more now than they used to. The hole was taking shape nicely. He dug down about 2 feet, working in a rough circle that followed the natural curve of the stump's root system. The thick roots created a kind of framework, and he could already envision how they'd help support whatever roof structure he could cobble together. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would be warm and dry. By early afternoon, he'd reached the 3-foot mark. The soil here was different, darker, more compacted, as if it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Vance drove his shovel down hard, putting his weight behind it. The blade struck something solid with a metallic clang that rang out through the quiet woods. Vance froze, his hands still gripping the shovel handle. That wasn't a rock. Rocks didn't sound like that. He pulled the shovel back and knelt down, brushing away loose soil with his hands. His fingers touched something smooth and cold, metal. His heart began to beat faster. He cleared away more dirt, working carefully now, his carpenter's hands suddenly delicate. A flat surface emerged, steel by the look of it, though heavily rusted. He traced its edges, finding corners, defining its shape. It was a hatch, a door of some kind set horizontally into the ground. Vance sat back on his heels, staring at what he'd uncovered. His mind raced through possibilities. A septic tank. No, not out here, not this old. A well cover? Wrong shape, wrong material. A root cellar maybe, though the construction looked too industrial for that. He cleared more soil away, working around the perimeter of the hatch. It was roughly 4 feet square, with thick hinges on one side, and what looked like a locking mechanism on the other. As he brushed away decades of accumulated dirt, he could make out faded lettering stamped into the metal, 1962, and below it, barely visible, a civil defense symbol, that distinctive triangular design he'd seen in old public service announcements. Understanding dawned slowly, almost disbelievingly. This was a fallout shelter, a Cold War-era bunker built during those years when people genuinely believed nuclear war might come at any moment. Someone had dug this into the earth and then, what? Abandoned it. Forgotten about it? Vance's hands were shaking slightly as he worked to expose the entire hatch. The locking mechanism was a heavy wheel, like something from a submarine door, crusted with rust but still intact. He gripped it with both hands and tried to turn it. It didn't budge. He stood, went to his camp and returned with a can of penetrating oil he kept for his tools. He sprayed the mechanism liberally, working the oil into every crevice he could find, then waited. Patience was something he'd learned these past months. Some things couldn't be rushed. While he waited, he cleared more dirt from around the hatch, exposing the full frame. The construction was solid, professional. Whoever built this had known what they were doing. The steel was thick, designed to withstand not just the elements, but potentially the aftermath of nuclear war. It was both impressive and sobering, a monument to a particular kind of American fear. After 20 minutes, he tried the wheel again. This time it moved, just barely, but it moved. He threw his full weight into it, muscles straining, and felt something give way inside the mechanism. The wheel turned grudgingly, metal grinding against metal, and he heard the heavy clunk of bolts withdrawing. The hatch was unlocked. Vance grabbed the handle welded to the hatch's surface and pulled. It was incredibly heavy, and the hinges screamed in protest, but slowly, inch by inch, the door rose. Stale air rushed out, not foul exactly, but old, as if it had been sealed away from the world for decades. When the hatch was fully open, Vance stood at the edge and peered down into darkness. He could make out the top rungs of a ladder, metal like everything else, descending into the black. He couldn't see the bottom. He should probably wait, think this through, maybe tell someone what he'd found. But curiosity burned in him, stronger than caution. This was his property. Whatever was down there, it was his to discover. Vance went back to his camp one more time, retrieving his heavy-duty flashlight and making sure his phone was in his pocket, though he doubted he'd get any signal underground. He returned to the hatch, clicked on the flashlight, and aimed the beam downward. The ladder descended about 12 feet to a concrete floor. He could see the bottom now, and what looked like the edge of a doorway or passage leading into a larger space. Taking a deep breath, Vance swung his legs over the edge and began to climb down. The ladder was still solid despite its age, each rung holding his weight without complaint. As he descended, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air grew cooler, drier. His feet touched concrete. He was standing in a small entry chamber, maybe 6 feet square, with a heavy door directly ahead of him. This door wasn't locked, just closed with a simple handle. Vance grabbed it and pulled. The door swung open smoothly, well balanced despite its weight, and Vance stepped into the past. His flashlight beam swept across a space that looked frozen in time. He was standing in a rectangular room, perhaps 20 feet long and 12 feet wide. The walls were concrete, painted white but yellowed with age. Along one wall stood metal shelving units, stocked with supplies, canned goods, water containers, boxes labeled in faded text. Along the opposite wall, he saw a small cot with folded blankets, a chemical toilet still in its packaging, a manual crank radio, and stacks of books and magazines. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise remarkably preserved. The dry, sealed environment had protected it all from decay. Vance moved deeper into the space, his flashlight revealing more details. A folding table with 2 chairs, a first aid kit mounted on the wall, boxes of candles and matches sealed in plastic, a manual can opener hanging from a hook. Whoever built this had prepared thoroughly for an extended stay underground. On the shelf nearest the door, he found what he was looking for, a logbook bound in leather, with a pen attached by a cord. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up and opened to the first page. The handwriting was neat, precise, the ink slightly faded, but still legible. October 15th, 1962. Today I completed the shelter. The world feels like it's holding its breath. The president spoke about Cuba, about missiles, about the very real possibility that everything could end. Florence thinks I'm being paranoid, but I can't shake this feeling. If the worst happens, we'll be ready. GM Gerald Morrison, according to the signature at the bottom of the page. Vance turned the pages carefully, scanning entries that chronicled the Cuban Missile Crisis from the perspective of one frightened man trying to protect his family. The entries continued through late October, then November, becoming less frequent as the crisis passed. The last entry was dated January 1963. The world didn't end. Florence says I wasted all this time and money on fear. Maybe she's right, but I can't regret being prepared. I hope we never need this place. But it's here if we do. GM. After that, blank pages. The shelter had been sealed and apparently forgotten. Vance stood in the middle of the bunker, turning slowly, taking it all in. This space, built in terror and abandoned in relief, had been waiting here beneath his land for over 60 years, waiting for someone to need it. And now, somehow, that someone was him. His mind spun with questions. Did Morrison own this land back then? Had he sold it and never mentioned the bunker? Had he died, taking the secret with him? And more importantly, what were the legal implications of this discovery? Did it belong to Vance now? Or did it belong to Morrison's heirs, if any existed? He should probably report this find to someone. The county, maybe, or a historical society. But standing here in this preserved capsule of Cold War anxiety, Vance felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. This shelter could save his life. Not metaphorically, but literally. Winter was coming, and he had no adequate protection from it. But here was a space designed to sustain human life in the harshest circumstances imaginable. It was dry, insulated by earth, and once he got some ventilation and lighting sorted out, it could be genuinely comfortable. The ethical questions nagged at him, but survival had a way of simplifying moral calculus. He would keep exploring, keep cataloging what was here. He'd try to find information about Morrison, about what happened to him, and whether he had family. But in the meantime, he wasn't going to freeze to death in the woods when there was shelter literally beneath his feet. Vance spent another hour exploring every corner of the bunker, making mental notes of everything he found. Then he climbed back up the ladder, emerging into the late afternoon sunlight. The world above looked different now, brighter, full of unexpected gifts hidden just below the surface. He stood beside the open hatch, looking down into the darkness, and felt something close to hope. Vance barely slept that night. He lay in his sleeping bag beneath the tarp, staring up at the stars, visible through gaps in the pine branches, his mind racing with everything he'd discovered. The bunker felt like something from a dream, too perfect, too convenient to be real. But it was real. He'd touched it, walked through it, breathed its stale air. As soon as dawn broke, he was up and moving. He made coffee, ate a quick breakfast of oatmeal cooked over his fire, and headed straight back to the bunker. In the daylight, the open hatch looked less mysterious and more practical, just a doorway into possibility. He decided during the sleepless hours that his first priority was to properly catalogue everything in the shelter. He needed to understand exactly what he had, what condition it was in, and what it might tell him about Gerald Morrison and his family. He owed the man that much, at least, to honor what he'd built and understand his story. Vance climbed down with his flashlight, a notebook, and a pen. He'd also brought a battery-powered lantern from his camp, which helped illuminate the space more evenly. The bunker looked different in the steady light, less eerie, more purposeful. He started with the logbook, settling into one of the folding chairs and reading through it systematically from beginning to end. Morrison's entries painted a vivid picture of those anxious autumn weeks in 1962. The man had been an engineer, judging by the technical detail in his descriptions of the bunker's construction. He'd worked mostly alone, sometimes with the help of a friend he referred to only as Jay, digging and building in secret on land he owned outside the city. His wife, Florence, appeared frequently in the entries, supportive but skeptical, worried about the expense, trying to humor what she clearly saw as her husband's overreaction to world events. But Morrison's fear had been genuine. He'd written about sleepless nights listening to radio broadcasts, about watching his neighbors go about their business, as if everything was normal, while he felt certain the world was about to end. October 22nd, 1962. The President's address tonight confirmed my worst fears. Soviet missiles in Cuba. We're at the brink. I told Florence we should move into the shelter immediately, but she refuses to leave the house. She says if the bombs fall, she'd rather die in her own bed than trapped underground. I can't make her understand. I'm terrified I've built this too late. Reading those words, written in such evident anguish, Vance felt a strange kinship with this man he'd never met. Morrison had been trying to protect his family the only way he knew how, even as that family questioned his judgment. It was a feeling Vance understood deeply. The crisis had passed, of course. By early November, Morrison's entries reflected cautious relief. By December, a kind of sheepish embarrassment crept into his writing. The final entry in January acknowledged that perhaps he'd overreacted, but couldn't quite bring himself to regret the preparation. After that, nothing. Just blank pages waiting for an emergency that never came. Vance set the logbook aside and began his inventory of the supplies. He worked methodically, shelf by shelf, writing down everything he found. The canned goods were extensive: vegetables, fruits, meats, all with dates from 1961 and 1962. He knew that properly canned food could last for decades, even longer in ideal conditions like this. Some of the cans showed signs of rust or deterioration, but many looked surprisingly intact. The water containers, 5-gallon plastic jugs, were empty now, their contents long since evaporated through imperfect seals. But the containers themselves were still usable. The water barrels Morrison had mentioned were larger drums, also empty but in decent condition. On the lower shelves, Vance found boxes of other supplies: candles, matches sealed in waterproof containers, batteries that had likely long since lost their charge, a hand-crank emergency radio, first aid supplies, blankets sealed in plastic, and even a change of clothes, practical items like work pants, flannel shirts, and sturdy boots. But it was the personal items that affected Vance most deeply. On a small shelf near the cot, he found a row of books, science fiction novels, a Bible, a collection of poetry, and several vintage magazines from 1962. Someone, probably Florence, had packed these, entertainment for the long hours underground should they ever need to use the shelter. In a wooden crate beneath the cot, he found family photographs. The first was a formal portrait from what looked like 1961, a couple in their 30s, dressed in their Sunday best, standing in a photography studio. The man was thin and serious, with dark-rimmed glasses and slicked-back hair. The woman was softer, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. On the back, someone had written in pencil, "Gerald and Florence, Christmas 1961. There were other photos too, snapshots of the couple at various events, always just the two of them. Picnics, holidays, what looked like a company function. But Vance noticed something. No children appeared in any of the photographs. He found drawings too, carefully preserved in a manila folder. Children's drawings, done in crayon and marker, simple but charming. Houses with smoke curling from chimneys, stick figures holding hands. A big sun smiling down on a family. On the back of one, a child's handwriting for Uncle Gerald and Aunt Florence. Love, Timothy. A nephew, then. The drawings suggested the Morrisons had been close with their nephew, even if they had no children of their own. Vance sat back holding one of the drawings and felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He thought of Shelby's childhood artwork, still tucked away in a folder in his old storage unit, the one thing he'd managed to keep when he lost everything else. She'd drawn houses too, elaborate ones with multiple rooms labeled Mom's room and Dad's room and my room and Austin's room. All of them connected, all under one roof. He shook off the memory and returned to his inventory. On the top shelf, he found something that made him pause. A woman's cardigan sweater, neatly folded, still faintly holding the scent of mothballs and old perfume. Florence's, no doubt. Something she'd left here for comfort, should they ever need this place. The shelter's ventilation system was ingenious. Morrison had installed intake and exhaust pipes that ran up through the soil to the surface, with hand-crank fans to move air through. Vance tested one of the cranks and was surprised to find it still worked, the mechanism well greased and protected from the elements. The chemical toilet was still in its original packaging, never used. The first aid kit was comprehensive, though many of the medications would be expired now. The manual can opener looked brand new. Everything spoke to careful preparation, to a man who'd thought through every detail of what his family might need to survive. And then they'd never needed it at all, and the shelter had been sealed away and forgotten. Vance spent hours in the bunker that first full day, documenting everything, handling each item with care. As the afternoon wore on and his lantern began to dim, he climbed back up to the surface to get fresh batteries. Eugene was the one person in town who might have information about the property's history, Vance realized. The hardware store had been in Eugene's family for generations. If anyone would remember Gerald Morrison, it would be him. The next morning, Vance made the drive into town in a borrowed truck, a favor from a construction site where he'd worked a few weeks back. He found Eugene in the hardware store, restocking shelves with the same methodical care he brought to everything. "Eugene," Vance said, trying to keep his voice casual, "you know much about the history of properties out near where I'm staying?" Eugene looked at him with those steady, knowing eyes. "Might, what are you looking for? Ever hear of anyone named Gerald Morrison? Would have owned land out that way back in the 60s, maybe?" Eugene was quiet for a moment, his hands still on the box of screws he was shelving. Then he nodded slowly. "Morrison? Yeah, I remember that name. Quiet fellow. Engineer, worked for the county. Died, must be 30-some years ago now." "Why?" Vance felt his heart beat faster. "Just curious. Found some old property records." "Did he have family?" "Had a wife. Florence, I think. She passed before he did, if I remember right. No kids. Lived pretty private lives." Eugene studied Vance's face. "You find something out there?" Vance hesitated, then decided on a version of the truth. "Just trying to understand who owned the land before me. Making sure there's no one I should contact about anything." Eugene nodded, accepting this. "Far as I know, no family left. Property went through a few hands after Morrison died. You bought it fair and square at auction. It's yours." The confirmation settled something in Vance's mind. Whatever was in that bunker, there was no one left to claim it. Morrison and Florence were both gone, and apparently childless. The shelter had been waiting all these years for someone to find it. That someone was him. Over the next week, Vance fell into a new routine. He spent his mornings doing odd jobs in town, helping Eugene with inventory, doing minor repairs for people who needed an extra pair of hands, anything that paid cash. His afternoons and evenings belonged to the bunker. He cleaned methodically, wiping down every surface, organizing the supplies, making the space livable. The concrete walls were solid, showing no signs of water damage or structural issues. Morrison had built this to last, and last it had. But there was something nagging at Vance, a detail he couldn't quite let go of. He'd explored every visible inch of the bunker, but something felt incomplete. The space was well designed, efficient, but it seemed slightly smaller than it should be, given the dimensions he'd calculated from outside. On the 8th day after his discovery, he was reorganizing the storage shelves when his hand brushed against something that didn't feel quite right. One of the shelf supports mounted to the wall had a different texture than the others. He pressed against it and felt it give slightly. His pulse quickened. He removed the items from that section of shelving and examined the wall more carefully. There, a barely visible seam in the concrete painted over to match the rest of the wall. A panel of some kind. Vance grabbed a screwdriver from his tool bag and carefully worked it into the seam. With some effort, the panel shifted, then swung open on hidden hinges. Behind it was a small recess, maybe 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep, carved into the earth beyond the concrete wall. And inside that recess sat a metal footlocker. It was military style, olive drab, about 2 feet long and a foot wide. Heavy by the way it sat solidly in place. And locked with a combination dial. Vance stared at it for a long moment, his mind racing. Morrison had hidden this deliberately behind a false panel that would only be found by someone who was truly exploring the space. What could be valuable enough to hide even within a hidden bunker? He tried the lock, turning the dial randomly. Nothing, of course not. He'd need the combination. He pulled out Morrison's logbook again, reading through the entries with new purpose. Morrison had been careful, methodical. If he'd hidden something, he might have left a clue to accessing it, subtle enough that a casual reader wouldn't notice, but clear enough that someone who needed to find it could. He read for over an hour, making notes of any numbers that appeared in the entries. Dates, times, measurements, anything that might form a combination. The lock had 3 dials, so he needed 3 numbers. Then he found it, an entry from November 15th, 1962, that seemed oddly specific. Florence's birthday today. She turned 33. We've been married 8 years. I gave her a necklace, nothing fancy, but she loved it. These are the numbers that matter. The years we've built together, the age she is now, the date that brought her into this world. In dark times, remember what we're protecting. 33, 8, and 15. Or maybe 15, 33, 8, following the date structure. Vance knelt in front of the footlocker, his hands trembling slightly. He turned the first dial to 15, the second to 33, the third to 8. He pressed the release button. Nothing. He tried different combinations, 33, 8, 15, 8 to 15 to 33, various permutations of the 3 numbers. On his 6th attempt, using 15, 8, 33, he felt something give. The lock clicked open. Vance sat back on his heels, taking a breath. Whatever was in here, Morrison had wanted it found only by someone who'd read his words carefully, who'd paid attention to what mattered to him. It felt like a test, or maybe a gift, but only to someone worthy of receiving it. He opened the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth and protected from moisture, were stacks of something flat and round. Vance carefully unwrapped the first bundle. Silver dollars. Rolls and rolls of them, each coin in pristine condition. He picked one up, turning it in the light from his lantern. It was a 1962 silver dollar, uncirculated, brilliant and perfect as the day it was minted. There were more bundles beneath the first layer. Not just silver dollars, but other coins too. Commemorative issues, proof sets, all from the early 1960s, all in perfect condition, protected from air and moisture for over 60 years. Vance's hands shook as he pulled out his phone and began researching. Even with spotty signal in the bunker, he could get enough information to understand what he was looking at. Uncirculated 1962 silver dollars, properly preserved, could be worth $50 to $100 each. The commemorative sets could be worth even more. There had to be several hundred coins here, maybe more. This was real money. Not survival money, not odd job money. This was life-changing money. He sat back against the wall, staring at the open footlocker. His first thought was practical. He could pay off his debts, get a real place to live, buy a decent truck. The second thought came with a sharp pain. He could reach out to Shelby and Austin from a position of stability rather than desperation. But then came the questions that had been haunting him since he'd first opened the bunker. Was this his? Morally, legally, did he have the right to this? Morrison had hidden it deliberately. He'd left no heir, no instructions about what should happen to his property after death. The land had changed hands multiple times, eventually ending up abandoned and sold for taxes. Vance had bought it legally. Everything on it and under it was technically his, but it still felt like taking something that wasn't meant for him. He thought about the entry he'd read, "Remember what we're protecting." Morrison had been protecting his family, his future. He'd hidden this wealth as insurance against catastrophe, and when catastrophe never came, he'd apparently never retrieved it. Maybe he'd forgotten about it. Maybe he'd meant to come back and never did. Maybe he died without ever telling anyone it was here. Vance carefully rewrapped the coins and closed the footlocker. He needed to think about this, needed to approach it carefully. But even as he told himself to be cautious, he felt something shifting inside him, a small flame of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. That evening, back at his camp, he found himself thinking about Father Dominic. The priest had a way of asking the right questions without judgment. Vance decided he'd talk to him, not about the specifics, but about the ethics of found property, about stewardship versus ownership. The next morning, he drove into town and found Father Dominic in the church garden, trimming back the last of the summer's growth in preparation for winter. "Vance," the priest said warmly, "good to see you. How are things? Father, can I ask you something?" "Hypothetically." Father Dominic smiled slightly. "In my experience, nothing is ever really hypothetical. But go ahead. If someone found something valuable that had been lost or abandoned for a long time, with no clear owner, what would be the right thing to do with it?" The priest set down his pruning shears and gave Vance his full attention. "That depends on a lot of factors. Is there any way to identify the original owner or their heirs? I think the owner died years ago. No children, no obvious family? Have you tried to find out for certain? Sometimes family connections aren't obvious." Vance nodded. "I'm looking into it." Father Dominic was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, there's a difference between ownership and stewardship. Legal ownership is one thing. If you've acquired something legally, it's yours. But stewardship asks a different question. What's the most honorable way to use what you've been given? What would honor the person who came before you? What if I need what I found? What if it could change my life? Then perhaps that's exactly why you found it," Father Dominic said gently. "But I'd encourage you to think about the person who left it behind. What would they want? And if you can't know for certain, what feels right in your heart?" Vance drove back to his property thinking about stewardship. That night he made a decision. He would try to find any living relatives of Gerald Morrison, truly try, not just go through the motions. If someone with a legitimate claim existed, he'd contact them. But if no one existed, if the trail was truly dead, then he would accept this gift. And he would honor Morrison's memory by using it wisely, not just to survive, but to build something meaningful. He would restore the bunker itself, preserve its history, document Morrison's story. And he would use whatever resources came from it to rebuild his own life the right way this time. Carefully, thoughtfully, with respect for second chances. It was a plan. Not perfect, but honest. And for the first time in years, Vance felt like he might actually have a future worth planning for. Vance spent the next 3 weeks researching Gerald Morrison's life with the dedication of a detective. He started at the county clerk's office, pulling property records that showed Morrison had purchased the 5 acres in 1961. The deed transfer after his death in 1987 showed the property going to a bank, then sold to a developer who never developed it, then eventually abandoned for unpaid taxes. At the public library, he found Morrison's obituary in the archived newspapers. Gerald Morrison, age 58, engineer for the County Public Works Department for 30 years. Preceded in death by his wife Florence. No mention of children. Services at Sacred Heart Cemetery. Vance drove to the cemetery and found their graves, simple headstones side by side. Lawrence Morrison, 1928 to 1983. Gerald Morrison, 1929 to 1987. No other family plots nearby, no indication of siblings or children. He searched online genealogy databases, finding census records and marriage certificates. Gerald and Florence had married in 1954. No birth records for children. Census records showed just the two of them in their household year after year. The nephew, Timothy, from the drawings, was harder to trace. Vance eventually found a record of a Timothy Brennan, son of Florence's sister, born in 1955. Further searching revealed a military record, Timothy Brennan, killed in action in Vietnam, 1973, 20 years before Gerald died. The trail was cold. No living relatives, no one to claim Morrison's legacy. Vance sat with this information for several days, letting it settle. He'd done his due diligence. There was no one to contact, no family to return these things to. The bunker, the coins, the story, they were his now if he chose to accept them. He chose to accept them, but he would do it Morrison's way, carefully, methodically, with respect for what had come before. His first step was practical. He took 3 rolls of silver dollars to a reputable coin dealer in Portland, a shop that had been in business for 40 years. The dealer examined them carefully, using a loop and scale, checking dates and mint marks. "These are beautiful," the dealer said. "Perfect condition, uncirculated." "Where did you get them?" "Estate fine," Vance said, which was technically true. "How much?" The dealer did some calculations. "For these 3 rolls, 60 coins, I can offer you $4,000. Vance kept his face neutral, though his heart was racing. $4,000 for 3 rolls. He had at least 20 rolls of silver dollars, plus the commemorative sets. This was more money than he'd imagined. "I'll take it," he said. The dealer counted out the cash, and Vance walked out of the shop with more money in his pocket than he'd had in years. He didn't rush to spend it. Instead, he opened a bank account, his first in 18 months, and deposited most of it, keeping enough cash for immediate needs. Over the next week, he made careful, calculated improvements to his situation. He bought proper work boots, warm clothes for winter, a better sleeping bag. He paid off the few debts he still carried. He bought materials to improve the bunker, proper LED lighting, a small solar panel system to charge batteries, weather stripping for the hatch. He also bought a decent camera and started documenting everything in the bunker. He photographed Morrison's logbook page by page. He photographed every item, every detail of the construction. He was preserving a piece of history, and he wanted to do it right. As he worked on the bunker, transforming it from a time capsule into a livable space, Vance felt something shifting inside himself. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about restoration of the bunker, yes, but also of himself. He installed the solar panels carefully on the surface, disguised among the trees where they'd be hard to spot but would still catch sunlight. He ran wiring down into the bunker, creating a proper electrical system. The LED lights transformed the space, making it bright and welcoming instead of dim and eerie. He cleaned the ventilation system thoroughly, oiled the fans, and installed new filters. He brought down a small camping stove for cooking, along with proper dishes and utensils. He set up a corner as a living area, another as a workspace, keeping Morrison's original supplies organized and preserved on their shelves. The bunker was becoming a home. One afternoon, while installing a shelf, Vance found another photograph he'd missed in his initial inventory. It was tucked into one of Morrison's books, a photo of Gerald and Florence standing beside a young boy, maybe 10 years old. They were at what looked like a county fair. The boy was grinning, holding a ribbon, proud of some 4-H project. On the back, Timothy's first prize, 1965. Vance stared at the photo for a long time. The way Morrison had his hand on the boy's shoulder, the pride in Florence's smile. They'd loved their nephew like a son. And then they'd lost him to a war on the other side of the world. He imagined Morrison coming back to this bunker after Timothy died, after Florence died, alone with his memories and his preparations for disasters that never came. Had he thought about the coins hidden in the footlocker? Had he considered retrieving them? Or had they become just another sealed-away piece of a life that hadn't turned out the way he'd planned? Vance understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. He created a memorial corner in the bunker, a small shelf where he displayed the family photographs, Morrison's logbook, and the drawing Timothy had made. He added a handwritten note in memory of Gerald Morrison, 1929-1987, and Florence Morrison, 1928-1983, who built this shelter in hope and fear and whose story deserves to be remembered. It felt right. His work on the bunker didn't go entirely unnoticed. Eugene commented on how Vance seemed different, more focused, more purposeful. "You building something out there?" he asked one day. Vance had considered how to answer this question. He decided on a version of the truth. Found an old structure on the property. Fixing it up. "It's good work," Eugene nodded approvingly. "Good to see you working with your hands again. You've got the skill for it." The comment meant more to Vance than Eugene probably realized. He'd spent so long seeing himself as a failure that he'd forgotten he actually knew how to build things, how to solve problems, how to create something worthwhile. One evening in late October, as Vance sat in the bunker eating a simple dinner of soup and bread, his phone buzzed with an email notification. He almost ignored it. Reception was spotty down here, but something made him check. It was from Shelby. Just 3 words. "How are you?" Vance stared at those 3 words for a full minute. His daughter, reaching out after 2 years of silence. Not demanding anything, not accusing, just asking. His first instinct was to respond immediately, to pour out everything that had happened. But he stopped himself. He'd learned to be more careful, more thoughtful. He needed to think about what to say, how to say it. He waited until the next morning, composing his response carefully. "I'm doing better. Really better. Working on something meaningful, miss you. Would love to talk when you're ready." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. 3 hours later she replied, "Glad to hear it. Maybe we can talk soon." Maybe. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was possibility, and that was more than he'd had in a long time. That night Vance wrote in a new journal he'd started. His own logbook in a way, documenting not disaster preparation, but recovery. He wrote about Morrison, about the bunker, about the strange gift of finding exactly what he needed when he needed it most. He wrote about Shelby's email and the fragile hope it represented. And he wrote about understanding, finally, that some treasures aren't found in the ground. They're found in the courage to keep trying, to honor what's been given, to believe that second chances might actually be real. The bunker was warm and dry around him. Outside, the first cold rain of autumn was falling. But inside, Vance felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt safe, not just physically, but in a deeper way. Safe enough to hope. Safe enough to try again. Safe enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. November arrived with frost on the ground and a sharp edge to the morning air. Vance woke in the bunker now, sleeping on the cot with proper blankets, warm and comfortable. The transformation was remarkable. What had been a dusty time capsule was now a functional living space, carefully balanced between preservation and practicality. He'd kept Morrison's original supplies intact on their shelves, but added his own belongings in separate areas. The bunker felt lived in but respectful, a conversation between past and present. His correspondence with Shelby had continued in careful increments. Short emails every few days, nothing too heavy, just small updates about their lives. She was working as a graphic designer in Seattle, had recently moved to a new apartment. He told her about his carpentry work, about fixing up an old structure on his property. Neither of them mentioned the years of silence between them, not yet. They were testing the ground, seeing if it would hold their weight. One morning, while reorganizing Morrison's bookshelf, Vance found something he'd overlooked, a letter tucked inside a copy of On the Beach, the apocalyptic novel from 1957. The envelope was sealed, but not glued, just tucked closed. On the front, in Morrison's handwriting, "To whoever finds this place." Vance's hands trembled as he opened it. The letter was dated March 1985, written on yellowed stationery in the same precise handwriting as the logbook. "To the finder of this shelter," it began. "If you're reading this, then I am gone, and this place has been discovered as I always suspected it might be. I'm writing this 3 years after my wife Florence passed, and I find myself thinking about what will happen to the things we built, the preparations we made, the life we lived. Florence and I had no children. That was both a choice and a circumstance, a story too personal to share here. Our nephew Timothy was like a son to us, but we lost him in Vietnam in 1973. There is no one to inherit what we built, no family line to carry forward. I built this shelter in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world felt like it was ending. Florence thought I was foolish, spending our savings on a hole in the ground. Maybe I was. The world didn't end, but I can't regret building this place, because it meant something to me. It meant I was trying to protect what I loved. I'm now 56 years old, and I know my time is limited. My heart isn't what it used to be. I've made provisions for the legal disposal of my property, but I've left this shelter as it was, sealed and preserved. If someone finds it, I want them to know it was built with love and fear in equal measure. In the footlocker behind the false panel, I've left something of value. Not for my sake, I won't need it, but for yours. If you've found this place, if you've read my words, then perhaps you need it. Perhaps you understand what it means to try to protect something, to prepare for the worst, to hope for the best. Use what I've left wisely. Don't squander it on foolishness. Honor this place by making it mean something. And if you can, when you're in a position to do so, help someone else who needs it. That's how these things should work, passing forward the grace we've been given. I've lived a quiet life, a fearful life perhaps. Florence used to tell me I worried too much about things that would never happen. She was right mostly. But I hope the person who finds this is braver than I was. I hope you use this second chance, because that's what it is, to build something better than I managed. The numbers that open the footlocker are the ones that mattered most to me. The day Florence was born, the years we were married, her age when I knew I'd love her forever. If you found them, then you paid attention. You read my words. That means something. Take care of this place. Remember the people who built it. And live better than you have been, because that's what second chances are for. Gerald Morrison, March 1985. Vance read the letter 3 times, tears blurring his vision by the 3rd reading. Morrison had known. He'd known someone would find this place eventually, someone who needed it. He'd left the coins deliberately as a gift to a stranger across time. It reframed everything. This wasn't just luck or coincidence. Morrison had made a conscious choice to leave this legacy for someone he'd never meet, trusting that whoever found it would be someone in need, someone worthy of a second chance. The weight of that gift, and the responsibility that came with it, settled on Vance's shoulders. Morrison had trusted him, across decades, to do right by what he'd been given. Vance carefully placed the letter in a frame he bought in town and hung it on the wall near Morrison's memorial corner. It deserved to be visible, to be remembered. That evening he made a decision. He would document Morrison's full story and share it. Not for attention or validation, but because Morrison's story deserved to be told, and because maybe it would help other people who were struggling, who needed to believe in second chances. He started writing, using his new laptop powered by the solar system. He wrote about finding the bunker, about Morrison's preparations and fears, about the nephew lost in Vietnam and the wife who died too young. He wrote about the letter and the gifts left behind, and carefully he wrote about his own story, the rise and fall, the losses, the time in the woods, the moment when a shovel struck metal and everything changed. He worked on it for days, revising, making sure it honored Morrison while being honest about his own journey. When it was finished, he created a simple video, just himself, sitting in the bunker, talking to the camera about what he'd found and what it meant. He posted it on social media with low expectations. Maybe a few people would watch it. Maybe it would disappear into the noise of the internet. Within 6 hours, it had 10,000 views. By the next morning, 50,000. The comments flooded in. People sharing their own stories of hardship and recovery. People moved by Morrison's thoughtfulness. People expressing hope that they, too, might find their second chance. Local news outlets reached out asking for interviews. A documentary producer wanted to film the bunker. Vance was overwhelmed. He hadn't expected this kind of response. But reading through the comments, seeing how Morrison's story was touching people, he understood that this was exactly what Morrison had hoped for, that his preparation, his fear, his gift would mean something to someone. Eugene called him. "Saw your video. The whole town's talking about it." "That's quite a thing you found out there." "It is," Vance said simply. "You doing okay with all the attention?" "Managing. It feels important to share the story, you know?" "Well, Morrison would appreciate that," Eugene said quietly. "I didn't know him well, but he seemed like a decent man. Good to have his story told, right?" Father Dominic stopped by the church one afternoon when Vance came to fill his water jugs. "I saw what you're doing," the priest said. "Honoring that man's memory, being honest about your own struggles. That takes courage." "He gave me a gift," Vance said. "This is how I honor it." "You're paying it forward," Father Dominic observed. "That's exactly what he asked for." The most meaningful response came 3 days after he posted the video. An email from Shelby, longer than the short messages they'd been exchanging. "Dad, I watched your video," I cried. "I'm so proud of what you're doing, how you're honoring this man's memory and being honest about your journey. I'd like to come visit if you'd want that. I want to see what you've built, and I want to talk. Really talk. Maybe we can figure out how to move forward. Love, Shelby." Vance read the email over and over, hardly believing it was real. His daughter wanted to visit. She was proud of him. She wanted to talk. He responded immediately. "Yes, please come. I'd love to see you. There's so much I want to say." They set a date for the following weekend. Vance spent the days preparing, cleaning the bunker more thoroughly, making sure everything was presentable. He was nervous in a way he hadn't been in years, the kind of nervousness that comes from caring deeply about something that actually matters. This was his chance, not just to show Shelby what he'd found, but to show her who he was becoming, to prove that this time the change was real. Morrison had given him the tools. Now it was up to Vance to build something worthy of the gift. The night before Shelby's visit, Vance couldn't sleep. He lay on the cot in the bunker, staring at the concrete ceiling, illuminated by the soft glow of his LED lights, running through everything he wanted to say to her. Apologies, explanations, hopes for the future, they all tangled together in his mind. Around midnight, restless, he got up and started organizing things that were already organized. He straightened the memorial corner, adjusted the photographs, ran his fingers over the frame containing Morrison's letter. As he lifted the frame to wipe a smudge from the glass, he felt something shift inside it. The backing seemed loose. He turned it over and noticed that the cardboard backing wasn't quite flush with the frame's edge. His heart began to beat faster. Carefully, he removed the small metal tabs holding the backing in place and lifted it away. Behind Morrison's letter, hidden in the space between the letter and the backing, was another envelope. Vance's hands shook as he pulled it out. This envelope was smaller, also sealed but not glued. On the front, in Morrison's handwriting, the whole truth. He sat down at the small table and opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated October 1985, 7 months after the first letter. "I wrote another letter in March, the one I left visible in the book. I wrote it believing I was dying, and in a way I was right. But I survived that particular crisis, and in the months since, I've had time to think about what I wrote and what I didn't write. The first letter told part of the truth, but not all of it. And if someone has found this second letter, then they've looked carefully enough to deserve the whole story. Florence and I never had children, but not entirely by choice. We tried. For years we tried. The doctors said it was unlikely, something about Florence's health. It broke her heart, and mine too, though I couldn't let her see how much. We loved Timothy like our own, but he was never truly ours. And then we lost him anyway. When Florence died in 1983, I realized something I'd been too afraid to admit while she was alive. I'd built this shelter not just to protect us from nuclear war, but to protect us from life itself. I was always preparing for disasters, always looking ahead to terrible possibilities, never quite present in the moment we actually had. Florence died in our bedroom peacefully, with me holding her hand. Not in this bunker, not in some imagined catastrophe. Just life ending the way life ends. After she was gone, I came out here one last time. I looked at all the preparations I'd made, all the supplies I'd stockpiled, this entire structure I'd built in fear. And I understood that I'd wasted so much time being afraid that I'd forgotten to fully live. So I made a decision. I would leave this place sealed, with its supplies and its secret. And if someone found it, someone who was struggling, someone who was afraid, someone who needed help, I would give them not just resources, but a lesson I learned too late. Don't live in fear of what might happen. Don't prepare so carefully for disaster that you miss the beauty of what's actually here, right now, in this moment. The coins I left are worth something, yes, but they're also a test. What will you do with unexpected wealth? Will you squander it, hoard it, or will you use it to build something meaningful? More importantly, will you use this second chance to live differently than you have been? Not just survive, but actually live. I wasted too many years worrying. Don't make my mistake. Be present for the people who love you. Take risks that matter. Build something that outlasts you, but not because you're afraid of what's coming. Build it because you love what's here. I'm writing this in October 1985. My health is failing again, for real this time. I don't expect to see another spring. That's all right. I've had a good life despite my fears. But I wish I'd been braver. I wish I'd trusted more, worried less, held Florence closer instead of building walls to protect her from imaginary threats. If you're reading this, you've been given a gift. Don't waste it on fear. Don't spend it on things that don't matter. Use it to reconnect with whoever you've lost. Use it to build bridges, not bunkers. The shelter I built can keep you alive through one winter or 10 or 20. But it can't give you a life worth living. Only you can do that. And you have to choose to do it every day with courage I didn't always manage. Be braver than I was. Love harder than I did. Live fully in the present, not trapped in preparation for a future that might never come. That's the real gift I'm leaving you. Not the coins, not the shelter, but the knowledge that someone else understood what it means to be afraid, to fail, to lose what matters, and the hope that you'll do better with your second chance than I did with my first. Take care of my Florence's memory. Take care of Timothy's drawings. And take care of yourself, not by hiding, but by living. Gerald Morrison, October 1985. Vance read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Morrison's words cut through every defense, every rationalization, every excuse he'd been carrying for years. This was exactly what he'd been doing, preparing, hiding, protecting himself from more failure by not trying at all. He'd been living in his own kind of bunker, underground in every way that mattered, cut off from the people he loved, because he was too afraid of disappointing them again. Morrison was giving him permission to stop hiding. More than that, he was giving him a directive, a mission. Don't just survive, live, build bridges, not bunkers. Tomorrow, Shelby would arrive. And Vance realized that he'd been approaching it all wrong. He'd been thinking about showing her what he'd found, what he'd restored, how he'd improved his circumstances. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was showing her who he was becoming, not the man with a restored bunker and some financial stability, but the man who was finally brave enough to be present, to be vulnerable, to risk loving and being loved, even though it might lead to more pain. Morrison had built this shelter to protect what he loved, but had ended up protecting himself from fully experiencing that love. Vance wouldn't make the same mistake. He carefully placed the second letter in another frame and hung it beside the first. Both truths deserved to be visible. The gift and the warning, the generosity and the hard-earned wisdom. Then he sat down and wrote an email to Shelby. Not a short, careful one, but a real one. Shelby, tomorrow when you come, I want to show you what I found. But more than that, I want to talk to you honestly about the years I lost, the ways I failed you, and the man I'm trying to become. I don't have all the answers. I'm still figuring things out, But I'm done hiding from my mistakes, and I'm done being too afraid to try again. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too broken to show it properly. I'm asking for a chance to be your father again. Not the father I was, but someone better. Someone present. Someone brave enough to show up even when it's hard. See you tomorrow. Dad. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The bunker was quiet around him. Morrison's photographs looked down from the memorial shelf. Gerald and Florence, young and in love, preparing for disasters that never came while missing the precious present they actually had. Vance understood now. The real twist wasn't finding the bunker or the coins. It was finding Morrison's true message, hidden behind the first obvious one. The money was just money. The real treasure was the wisdom, the hard-earned understanding that second chances are wasted if you're still living in fear. Tomorrow, when Shelby arrived, Vance wouldn't hide in preparation and planning. He would be present. He would be honest. He would be brave enough to love her without guarantees, to hope without certainty, to build a bridge between them, even though bridges can be crossed both ways, toward and away. That was the gift Morrison had really left him. Not survival, but the courage to truly live. Vance lay back down on the cot, but this time sleep came easier. He'd spent so long underground in every sense. Tomorrow he would start climbing back into the light. Vance woke before dawn, his stomach tight with anticipation. Shelby would arrive around noon, driving down from Seattle. He had 6 hours to prepare, though he knew no amount of preparation would make this conversation easier. He climbed up from the bunker into the cold November morning. The woods were still and quiet, frost glittering on every surface like scattered diamonds. His breath misted in the air as he stood beside the tree stump, looking at the property with new eyes. 8 months ago he'd arrived here with nothing, just a tarp, a sleeping bag, and the last shreds of his dignity. Now he had something real to show for those months, something beyond mere survival. But more importantly, he'd changed in ways that couldn't be measured by physical improvements. He'd learned patience. He'd learned respect for what came before him. He'd learned that second chances meant nothing if you didn't have the courage to use them properly. He spent the morning in careful preparation, but not the obsessive kind that had once defined him. He tidied the bunker, made sure everything was presentable, but he didn't try to make it perfect. He swept the area around the entrance, cleared away some debris, but he left the woods looking natural, honest. He'd bought groceries, real food, including ingredients for the vegetable soup Shelby had loved as a child. It was a small thing, maybe a transparent one, but it mattered to him. He wanted her to know he remembered, that the good parts of their past hadn't been erased by the bad years. Around 10:30 his phone buzzed. A text from Shelby, running a little early. Should be there by 11:30. Nervous but excited. Vance's heart squeezed. She was nervous too. Somehow that made him feel less alone in this. He texted back, me too. Both things. Drive safe. He used the remaining time to walk the property, following the rough paths he'd worn through the undergrowth over the months. The land was beautiful in its wild simplicity. Douglas firs reaching toward grey skies, sword ferns carpeting the forest floor, the sound of a small creek running somewhere in the distance. This place had saved him, not just by providing shelter, but by giving him space to think, to be quiet, to strip away all the noise and figure out what actually mattered. At 11:20, he heard a car engine coming up the dirt road. His pulse jumped. He walked to the clearing where the road ended, watching as a blue sedan came into view and stopped. The driver's door opened, and Shelby stepped out. She was 28 now, a woman, though part of him still saw the serious little girl who used to sit beside his drafting table. She'd cut her dark hair short since he'd last seen her, and she wore glasses he didn't remember. She looked like Brenda around the eyes, but she had his stubborn chin. They stood there for a moment, 20 feet apart, just looking at each other. Then Shelby smiled, tentative, uncertain, but real, and Vance felt something break open in his chest. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," he managed. "Thank you for coming." She walked toward him, and they met in an awkward hug that gradually became less awkward. She was smaller than he remembered, or maybe he'd just forgotten what it felt like to hold his daughter. When they pulled apart, both of them had tears in their eyes. "You look different," Shelby said. "And good different? Healthier?" "I feel different," Vance said honestly. "Come on, let me show you what I've been working on." He led her through the woods toward the tree stump, watching her take in the surroundings. She'd always loved nature, he remembered. Another thing he'd forgotten in the years of chaos and loss. "This is beautiful out here," she said. "Quiet. That's been good for me, I think." The quiet. He paused as they reached the stump. "This is where I started digging. I was planning to make a simple shelter, just something to get through winter. And then I found something I wasn't expecting." He showed her the hatch, and Shelby's eyes widened. "What is that?" "A Cold War bunker, built in 1962 by a man named Gerald Morrison. It's been sealed and forgotten for over 60 years. He gestured toward the ladder. "Want to see?" Shelby peered down into the opening, then looked at him with a mixture of amazement and curiosity. "This is what you've been working on? What you mentioned in your video? This is it. Come on down. It's safe." She followed him carefully, and Vance watched her face as she reached the bottom and saw the bunker for the first time. The lights he'd installed cast a warm glow over everything. Morrison's memorial corner was visible, the photographs and letters displayed with care. "Dad," Shelby breathed, "this is incredible." He gave her the tour, explaining everything. Morrison's story, the logbook entries, the nephew lost in Vietnam, Florence's death, the coins hidden in the footlocker. He showed her both of Morrison's letters, watching her read them carefully. When she finished the second letter, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "He was writing to you. All of this, he left it specifically for someone who needed it." "I know," Vance said quietly. "It took me a while to really understand that. But yes, he left it for someone like me. Someone who'd lost their way." Shelby walked slowly around the bunker, touching things gently. The preserved supplies, the vintage magazines, the cot where Vance slept. She paused at Morrison's memorial corner, studying the photographs of Gerald and Florence. "They look happy," she said. "In the photos. I think they were, mostly. Morrison spent too much time being afraid, according to his letters. But they loved each other." Vance joined her at the memorial. He asked whoever found this place to be braver than he was. To not waste their second chance on fear. Shelby turned to look at him. "Is that what this has been for you? A second chance?" This was the moment. The conversation he'd been both dreading and needing to have. "Can we sit?" Vance asked, gesturing to the small table and chairs. They sat across from each other, and for a moment Vance couldn't find the words. Then he remembered Morrison's advice. Be present, be honest, be brave. "Shelby, I need to apologize to you. Really apologize. Not the half-hearted attempts I made before." He took a breath. "I failed you. I failed your brother. I failed your mother. I let my own pride and shame become more important than the people I loved. When everything fell apart, instead of holding on to you all tighter, I pushed you away because I couldn't stand for you to see what I'd become." Shelby's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. "You tried so hard to maintain a relationship with me," Vance continued, his voice rough. "You called, you visited, you invited me to be part of your life. And I kept disappointing you, kept choosing my own misery over your love. The last time we talked, when you told me you couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore, you were right. You were protecting yourself, and I don't blame you for that." "Dad," Shelby started, but Vance shook his head gently. "Let me finish, please." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Finding this place, reading Morrison's story, understanding what he was trying to tell me, it woke something up. I realized I'd been living underground in every way that mattered, hiding from failure, from disappointment, from the risk of trying again. But Morrison's message was clear. Second chances are wasted if you're still living in fear. He reached across the table, and after a moment, Shelby took his hand. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," Vance said, "but I can promise I'm done hiding. I'm done letting fear keep me from the people I love. I want to be your father again, not the father I was before, but someone better, someone who shows up." Shelby was crying openly now, but she was also smiling. "I've missed you so much, Dad, the real you. I've wanted to believe you could change, but I was so scared of hoping and being disappointed again. I know, and I'm not asking you to trust me completely, not right away. I know I have to earn that back, but I want to try. I want to rebuild our relationship slowly and honestly. Shelby squeezed his hand. I want that too. I've been so angry for so long, but underneath I just missed my dad. From his shelf, Vance retrieved the plastic-sleeved drawing, her childhood dream house with all the rooms connected. Shelby's breath caught when she saw it. You kept this. Through everything, Vance said. You understood something then that I forgot, that keeping everyone together is what matters most. They spent the afternoon talking, eating the soup he'd made, sharing stories about the years they'd missed. When Shelby finally had to leave for Seattle, she hugged him tightly. Will you come back? He asked. Yes, she said without hesitation. I want to keep building this, Dad. As her car disappeared down the road, Vance returned to the bunker. His phone buzzed. A text from Shelby. Made it home safe. Today was good. Let's talk next week. He smiled and typed, absolutely. Love you. Love you too, Dad. 3 words he'd waited 2 years to hear again. Vance looked around Morrison's shelter, this gift across time that had given him more than survival. It had given him the courage to stop hiding and start building bridges. And tonight, sitting with the warmth of reconciliation still glowing in his chest, he understood that second chances weren't just about survival. They were about having the courage to love again, even when it scared you. That was the real treasure Morrison had left behind. The morning after Shelby's visit, Vance woke with a clarity he hadn't felt in years. Something fundamental had shifted during their conversation. Some weight he'd been carrying had finally been set down. Not all of it. He still had work to do, miles to go before real redemption, but enough that he could breathe more easily. He made coffee and sat at the small table, looking at Shelby's childhood drawing that he'd left out after showing it to her. The crayon lines were faded now, the paper soft with age, but the message remained clear. All the rooms connected, everyone together under one roof. He picked up his phone and, before he could overthink it, sent a text to Austin. Your sister visited yesterday. It was good. I know I don't have the right to ask, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure, no expectations. Just love, Dad. He hit send and set the phone down, not expecting a response. Austin's silence had been longer, his anger deeper. Vance had accepted that his son might never be ready to reconnect, and he had to be okay with that. You couldn't force forgiveness. You could only offer it space to grow. The bunker needed more work. It always would, really. Preservation was an ongoing process, not a destination. But as Vance looked around the space, he realized it had become more than just Morrison's legacy or his own shelter. It had become a symbol of transformation, a physical representation of what was possible when you honored the past while building toward the future. He spent the morning working on a new project, creating a proper display for Morrison's logbook and letters. He'd bought a glass case in town, the kind used for protecting valuable documents. The logbook would sit open to Morrison's first entry, with the 2 letters displayed beside it. People who visited, and more people were asking to visit after his video, would be able to read Morrison's own words, understand his story directly. Around noon, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello? Dad? Austin's voice, uncertain, younger sounding than Vance remembered. It's me. Vance's hand tightened on the phone. He sat down carefully, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. Austin, hi, thank you for calling. Silence on the other end, then. Shelby told me I should watch your video. I didn't want to, but she kept pushing, so I did. Okay, Vance said, keeping his voice steady. The guy in that video, Morrison, he reminded me of you. Always preparing for the worst, always trying to protect everyone from things that might never happen. Always so focused on the future that you missed what was actually happening right in front of you. The words stung, but they were true. You're right, Vance said. That's exactly what I did. Shelby says you're different now. She says you were honest with her, that you apologized for real. Austin's voice was still guarded. Is that true? Yes, I told her things I should have said years ago. I took responsibility for my failures. I didn't make excuses. Why now? Austin asked, and Vance could hear the pain underneath the question. Why are you suddenly capable of this when you weren't before? It was a fair question, one Vance had asked himself many times. I hit bottom, Austin. Real bottom. Lost everything, ended up living in the woods with nothing. And when I found this bunker, when I read Morrison's letters about wasting his life being afraid, something broke open. I understood finally that being afraid of failing again was just another way of failing. I had to choose to try, even knowing I might mess it up. You did mess it up, Austin said quietly. You messed up my whole childhood. The divorce, the drinking, the broken promises, all of it. I know, and I'm so sorry, Vance's voice cracked. I can't undo any of that. I can't give you back the father you deserved. But I can try to be someone better now, if you'll let me. Not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to show you I've changed. The silence stretched so long, Vance thought Austin might have hung up. Then I'm not ready to see you. Not yet, I understand, but maybe we could talk sometimes. On the phone. Hope flared in Vance's chest, almost painful in its intensity. I would love that. Any time you want. Any time at all. I'm still really angry at you, Austin said, his voice thick with emotion. You have every right to be. Shelby forgives too easily. I'm not like her, I know, and that's okay. You don't owe me forgiveness, Austin. You don't owe me anything. I saw your video, Austin said after a moment. The way you talked about Morrison, about second chances and being brave enough to try again. I wanted to hate it, but I couldn't, because I could see you meant it. Vance closed his eyes, tears slipping down his face. I do mean it. Every word. I need time, Dad. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Okay, a pause. I have to go. Okay, thank you for calling, Austin. It means more than you know. Yeah, bye. The line went dead. Vance sat holding the phone, overwhelmed by the gift of his son's voice, his son's willingness to even this small step. Both his children were still there. Damaged, hurt, cautious, but still there. Still willing to consider the possibility that their father might become someone worth knowing again. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was the beginning of something that might, with time and care and courage, grow into redemption. And that was enough for now. The days following Austin's call settled into a new rhythm. Vance continued his work on the bunker, continued his odd jobs in town, continued documenting Morrison's story. But now there was something more, regular phone calls with Shelby, and occasionally, carefully, with Austin. The conversations with his son were brief and cautious, nothing like the easy flow he'd found with Shelby. But they were real. Austin would call every week or so, usually keeping it to 10 minutes, asking about the bunker or Vance's work, never quite ready to talk about deeper things. Vance didn't push. He answered whatever questions Austin asked, shared what he was comfortable sharing, and let his son control the pace. It was Shelby who suggested the next step. I want to help you document Morrison's story properly, she said during one of their weekly calls. Not just your videos, but something more permanent. A written record, maybe even a small exhibit. I could design it, layouts, graphics, the whole presentation. You'd do that? Vance asked, touched by the offer. I want to. This story matters, Dad. Morrison's story and yours. They should be preserved right. They planned for her to visit again, this time for a weekend, so they'd have more time to work together. Vance prepared carefully, making a list of all Morrison's artifacts, organizing his notes and photographs, thinking through what the story needed to convey. When Shelby arrived on a Friday afternoon in early December, she brought her laptop, a portable scanner, and an energy that filled the bunker with life. They spent the evening going through everything, scanning pages of the logbook, photographing artifacts from every angle, Shelby asking questions that helped Vance see details he'd missed. Tell me about finding the second letter, she said. That moment when you realized Morrison had left you more than just resources. Vance described it. The loose backing on the frame, the hidden envelope, the way Morrison's final message had reframed everything. Shelby listened intently, taking notes. her designer's mind already working on how to present the narrative. They worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. Around midnight, taking a break, Shelby said, "You know what's beautiful about this?" Morrison thought he'd wasted his life being afraid, but he actually created something that's helping people 60 years later. That's not waste, that's legacy. I think he'd be surprised by that, Vance said. He saw himself as a failure in a lot of ways. But he wasn't, and neither are you, Dad. Shelby met his eyes. You've made mistakes, big ones. But look at what you're building now. Look at how you're honoring his memory and helping other people who are struggling. That counts for something. The next day, they created a timeline of Morrison's life, his marriage to Florence, the Cuban Missile Crisis, building the bunker, losing Timothy in Vietnam, Florence's death, his final years alone. Shelby designed beautiful layouts that told the story visually, incorporating Morrison's own words from his logbook and letters. This could be a website, she said, or a physical exhibit at the local historical society. Maybe both. I like both, Vance said. Morrison deserves to be remembered by his community. They also worked on Vance's part of the story, not dwelling on the failures, but being honest about the fall and the recovery. Shelby helped him find the right words, the right balance between vulnerability and hope. People need to know it's possible to come back from rock bottom, she said. But they also need to know it's hard work, not just luck. Sunday afternoon, as Shelby was packing up to leave, she said, "Austin asked about you yesterday. Real questions, not just surface stuff." Vance looked up from organizing his notes. What did he ask? He wanted to know if I thought you'd really changed, or if this was just another phase. If I trusted you again? She paused. I told him I'm learning to trust you. That trust has to be rebuilt slowly, but you're doing the work. What did he say? He said he'd think about maybe visiting. Not soon, but someday, Shelby smiled. That's progress, Dad. Real progress. After she left, Vance sat in the bunker, looking at the work they'd created together. The layouts, the timeline, the careful documentation of Morrison's legacy. His daughter had given him her time, her talent, and her trust. She'd helped him transform a personal discovery into something that could touch others. He pulled out his journal and wrote, "Morrison built this bunker to protect what he loved. I've been given the chance to use it to reconnect with what I love. The bunker itself isn't the gift. The gift is the courage to stop hiding and start building bridges." His phone buzzed. A text from Austin. "Shelby showed me some of the Morrison exhibit stuff. Looks good. You're doing something meaningful there." Vance stared at the message, his heart full. It was just a few words, a small acknowledgement, but it represented Austin seeing him, really seeing him, as someone capable of doing good work, of creating meaning. He typed back, "Thanks, son. That means a lot coming from you." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "Yeah, talk next week?" "Absolutely." Vance set down the phone and looked around the bunker. Morrison's shelter, his workshop, his bridge back to the world above. The concrete walls held stories now, layers of meaning that went deeper than mere survival. He was building something that would outlast him. Not because he was afraid of what was coming, but because he loved what was here. And that made all the difference. 3 months had passed since Shelby's first visit, and winter had settled fully over the woods. Snow lay thick on the ground, transforming the landscape into something pristine and quiet. But inside the bunker, Vance was warm and comfortable, the space heated by a small, efficient system he'd installed with money from careful coin sales. He'd sold perhaps a third of Morrison's collection, always to reputable dealers, always documenting what went where. The rest he'd kept, preserved in the footlocker as Morrison had left them, a nest egg for the future, insurance against hardship, but not something to be squandered. The money had changed his circumstances substantially. He'd paid off every debt he still carried. He'd bought a reliable used truck. He had a bank account with actual savings. But more importantly, he'd invested in the things that mattered, the bunker's restoration, the historical documentation, and occasional gifts for his children that weren't grand or desperate, just thoughtful. The website Shelby designed had gone live 2 weeks ago. The Morrison Shelter, a Cold War legacy, told Gerald and Florence's story with dignity and care, incorporating photos, logbook excerpts, and both of Morrison's letters. The response had been overwhelming. Historians reaching out, other Cold War bunker enthusiasts sharing their own discoveries, and hundreds of people commenting on the human story at the heart of it all. The local historical society had asked to create a physical exhibit, and Vance had agreed with one condition: any proceeds from exhibit attendance would go to a fund helping people experiencing homelessness. Morrison would have approved, he thought. Pay it forward. His relationship with Shelby had deepened into something real and sustainable. They talked twice a week, sometimes about nothing important, sometimes about everything that mattered. She'd visited 3 more times, and each visit felt more natural, less fraught with the weight of their broken history. Austin remained more distant, but the distance was closing. Their phone calls had grown longer, more substantive. Austin had started asking about Vance's life before the fall, what it had been like when he was young, starting his career, meeting Brenda. He was trying to understand the whole person, not just the father who disappointed him. Last week, Austin had said something that lodged in Vance's heart. Shelby says you're thinking about offering the bunker as a retreat space for people going through hard times. Is that true? I'm considering it, Vance had replied carefully. Morrison wanted whoever found this place to help others when they could. Seems like a good way to honor that. That's actually pretty cool, Dad, Austin had said, and those 4 words, that acknowledgement, had meant everything. Now, on a cold January evening, Vance stood outside the bunker entrance, looking at the brass plaque he'd just installed. He'd had it made by a craftsman in town, the words etched with care. The Morrison Shelter, built 1962 by Gerald Morrison. Restored 2024 by Vance Reyes, a place of second chances. In memory of Gerald Morrison, 1929-1987, and Florence Morrison, 1928-1983, who built this shelter in love and fear, and whose gift continues to offer hope. The plaque gleamed dully in the winter light, already collecting a thin layer of snow. Vance brushed it clean with his gloved hand, then stood back to look at it. It felt right, honoring the past while acknowledging the present, marking this place as something more than just a structure. Father Dominic had come by yesterday to see the finished plaque and bless the space in his quiet way. You've turned something built in fear into something that offers hope, the priest had said. That's the work of grace, Vance. That's redemption. Eugene had stopped by too, bringing a bottle of cider to celebrate the completion of the restoration. They'd sat in the bunker drinking cider and talking about Morrison, about the town's history, about how strange and wonderful it was that this place had been waiting here all along. You've done good work here, Eugene had said in his gruff way. Morrison would be pleased. Vance hoped that was true. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Shelby, but instead it was from Austin. Been thinking, maybe I could visit in the spring. See this bunker everyone keeps talking about? Vance read the message 3 times, hardly believing it. Austin wanted to visit. After all these years, after all the damage and distance, his son was willing to take this step. He typed carefully, I would love that. Any time you're ready. No pressure, just whenever feels right. The response came quickly. Maybe April. After the weather gets better? April sounds perfect. Let me know what dates work for you. Okay, thanks, Dad. 2 words that held an entire world of possibility. Vance stood in the snow, looking at the plaque, at the bunker entrance, at the woods stretching away in every direction. He thought about Morrison, alone in his final years, believing he'd wasted his life on fear and preparation for disasters that never came. Morrison couldn't have known that his shelter would save someone 60 years later, not from nuclear war, but from the slower disaster of a life collapsing from within. The bunker had given Vance more than shelter. It had given him purpose, connection, and a roadmap for how to live with courage instead of fear. Morrison's final message, build bridges, not bunkers, had become Vance's guiding principle. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was present, showing up for his children, for his community, for himself. The future was still uncertain. It always would be. But uncertainty no longer paralyzed him. He'd learned to live with it, to move forward despite it. Inside the bunker, everything was warm and ready. The lights glowed softly. Morrison's memorial corner stood complete. The logbook was open to its first entry, preserved under glass. The photographs of Gerald and Florence looked out from their frames, their story told and honored. Vance climbed down the ladder and sat at his small table. He opened his own logbook and began to write, documenting this day. The plaque installation, Austin's message, the snow falling gently outside. "Some treasures are found in the ground," he wrote. "Others are found in the courage to keep trying, to build bridges, to believe in second chances even when they seem impossible. Morrison gave me both kinds of treasure. I hope I'm using them the way he intended, not just to survive, but to truly live." He set down his pen and looked around the space that had become his home. His workshop, his connection to a man he'd never met, but whose wisdom had saved him. Above ground, the snow continued to fall, covering the woods in white silence. Below ground, in the shelter built during one of history's most fearful moments, a man sat in warmth and peace, no longer running from his past or terrified of his future. Just living, present, connected, home. The bunker's hatch remained open to the world above, no longer sealed away, no longer hidden. A shelter that had once represented fear now stood as a monument to hope. And that, Vance thought, was exactly how it should be.